Hello, and welcome to this PATINS channel YouTube presentation on AIM for Success, implementing accessible instructional materials in today's classroom. So you've got AIM, you've acquired some accessible instructional materials, but you don't know how to help your students use these files effectively. This video session will assist you and other conference team members in considering the services, supports, tools, and instruction essential to provide AIM to students in today's 21st century context. A framework of collaboration will be emphasized by our two national guest presenters, Scott Marfilius and Donna McNear. Both presenters have rich experiences in teaching and in the provision of assistive technology for students with learning disabilities, visual disabilities, and physical disabilities. The blueprint they will present will focus on the implementation of AIM by examining the available specialized formats of K through 12 print instructional materials, and will include information on the selection process, device output-input features, applications, services, and tools that can maximize student access, participation, and progress in their educational programming. Welcome, Scott and Donna.
Thank you, Vicki. Donna and I would like to share with you an overview of what we're going to be covering during this session. We want to give you an introduction to the information that we're going to be sharing that really focuses on a collaboration for AIM, accessible instructional materials. With that, we found it to be very beneficial when we're looking at implementing accessible instructional materials in the classroom to have a framework for that implementation. Towards the end of this session, we're going to be focusing on reading comprehension techniques and how those can be utilized to assist students. And at the very end, we're going to give you the opportunity to look at some action planning and to discuss about a team that we've worked with who were successful in implementing AIM in the classroom. So with our particular focus at this time, what we really want to make sure that people are realizing that our focus for accessible instructional materials is on literacy. It's literacy to be able to access content materials in the different areas. It's the area of being able to assist them in the area of communication, to be more efficient. And in the end, what we want all of our students to do is to be more independent. So now Donna's going to share with you some information about collaboration.
Thank you, Scott. Collaboration for AIM is foundational to the work we do with children with disabilities in promoting their use of accessible instructional materials. There are some trends that we're seeing in the 21st century context that really promote the ideas of collaboration. So one of the trends is moving from disability categories and thinking about children in terms of their disability and thinking about the formats that they use for literacy. For example, do they use a print format, audio, digital, or Braille format? Another trend is moving from discrete roles as professionals to shared responsibility. For example, in the past it was very clear as to what my role would be as a teacher for children with visual impairments and what a role would be, for example, you, Scott, as an assistive technology specialist. But we're also realizing that we have a shared responsibility in teaching all children, and it's not just about what disability label they may have, but it's about what kind of materials they use for literacy skills. And then another trend is from separate strategies that we traditionally have used to blended knowledge and skills, and it's taking what you know as an assistive technology specialist, for example, and what I've known as a teacher for children with visual impairments, and blending those knowledge and skills to improve the use of accessible instructional materials and tools for children with disabilities. So another important aspect in answering the question of why we should all collaborate together, I think is well answered in a quote that I like to share, and it's from Parker Palmer in the book The Courage to Teach. And he says that the subjects we teach are as large and complex as life. So our knowledge of them is always flawed and partial. So no matter how we devote ourselves to reading and research, teaching requires a command of content that always eludes our grasp. And I think this quote really captures the essence of the complexities around our children and why we really need to collaborate in our work with children. So we all have commonalities as teachers and service providers in our work with children in the following ways. We have an understanding of universal design features and tools. We have an understanding of the built-in access features that all tools have. We have commonalities in using the same file formats. And we have commonalities in that we all need to interpret data and use results to understand the teaching and learning activities we're doing with children. We also have commonalities in the print, digital, audio, and Braille formats. For example, we have commonalities in the functionality of our tools and using accessible instructional materials. For example, the purpose is to help kids gain and acquire literacy skills. So that's common to the work we're all doing. And we all have commonalities in the tasks. For example, a student may need to use accessible instructional materials and tools to do an essay in a language arts class. And then we have commonalities in the operations and utilities that all our tools use. For example, the menu structure is common to many of our tools. And then there's commonalities in navigation and commands and similarities amongst all the tools that we use. And so I just want to say a word about Braille here. So Braille input and output does not need to be a barrier to support children. And for the Braille format for assistive technology specialists, that may be less familiar and may cause some concern. But we have been promoting the Braille format in terms of a shared responsibility for all of us because of the commonalities that I've just discussed. And so when you see dots on a page, like you see here, to not be overly concerned. And if you're collaborating with somebody who knows what the dots mean, then it won't be a problem in trying to work together to help students achieve using accessible instructional materials.
So what we want to do now is give you a framework for implementing accessible instructional materials. One of the things that Donna and Kelly and myself, colleagues who have worked on this presentation, have looked at is a framework that really has been successful. And there's 8 different parts that we're going to be going into. We want to be taking a look at the consideration of the characteristics that you need to be focusing on. Just briefly talk about selection of the different file formats. We want to talk about output features of the tools because this is going to have an impact on how that tool gets utilized in the classroom. Then we want to get into application and use. We want to discuss features of those tools and how that matches to the individual's needs. Then we're going to end with taking a look at services, the supports that are needed, and more importantly, the instruction that needs to take place to be successful in implementing accessible instructional materials in the classroom. So the first one that we want to get into is some of the consideration characteristics. One of the things that we're going to be taking a look at, because when we're looking at some of these different formats, often it might end up requiring an individual to use a different type of channel for learning. And so it might be the auditory channel. And so when we think about providing digital text for somebody who might be listening to that information, there might be some consideration that needs to be made for conducting a listening assessment to be able to determine how that individual is when it comes to auditory processing. We also need to think about the level of understanding and the comprehension when that text is being read out loud. When we also take a look at this, often it has to do with the length of time that an individual has to listen to the material. Very different if we're listening to material for 5 minutes and having to interact with it, or if we have to listen to material for an extended period of time, say 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and being able to process that information. And then one of the other considerations with the audio characteristics we want to do is if I'm taking the information in auditorily, how am I going to take notes on that information when it's a listening assignment, especially if writing is a barrier or something like that. There's also characteristics that we want to talk about when it comes to the digital file format. The digital text can simultaneously provide both maybe the audio, maybe some video if needed, possibly large print. And some of the things that we need to think about is being able to provide supports for gaining meaning from that information. So rather than listening to a longer period of text, being able to set the stage for what they're going to be listening and trying to take in. And then instruction and ongoing support we'll cover again later as well. And some other characteristics?
Thank you, Scott. I'm going to talk about large print and Braille. So I think it's helpful for everybody to understand the definition of large print because there has been some confusion around that. So that everybody's on the same page with understanding how large print is defined. Large print is generally defined as print that is larger than the print size commonly used by the general population, which is 8 to 12 points in size. So it's essentially just print that's larger than 8 to 12 point print size. And so the characteristics we want to think about with large print is the following. So it's just good to know that print materials in the early grades are typically in a larger print size. So often we're not concerned about large print with younger children, but we monitor that as children get older and print size decreases in textbooks. And additional print presentation features contribute to print access. So in addition to large print, there are other features as to how print is presented that affect how a child may view the print page. So for example, contrast, clutter, and spacing all contribute to how a child may view print on a page. And then another characteristic of print viewing has to do with access to illustrations. And so we want to pay attention to how children view photos, maps, and graphs, because that can make a difference in terms of print size and how we may want to offer that to children. And then for Braille characteristics, I think it's important for all of us to remember that there's a variety of Braille codes. For example, there's a literary Braille code, and that is the code used for general materials. So for example, typical reading materials, language arts materials are all in the literary Braille code. And then another aspect of the literary Braille code is the Braille in contracted Braille, which is a unique symbols used to shorten words, or uncontracted Braille, which is letter by letter representation. So another code is the Math Braille code, and we call that the Nemeth code for mathematics and science notation. And all math and science materials are presented in the Math Braille code. And then there are additional Braille codes, such as music, computer, and foreign language. And then another aspect of Braille characteristics are the unique formats that are sometimes used in Braille presentations. So for example, page numbering has some unique features specific to Braille, along with the use of transcribers' notes. That's important for teachers and providers to be aware of. Another aspect of Braille, or what we consider the tactile format, are tactile graphics. And those are images designed to be interpreted by touch. And that's another important characteristic to know about in terms of the Braille format.